There's a moment every teacher dreads. When you realize one of your students is in trouble, real trouble, and you're the only one who's noticed. For Karen Mitchell, that moment came on day 60. 60 days of watching her brightest student, 12-year-old David Martinez, wear the same faded jeans and worn-out sneakers. 60 days of seeing him arrive early and leave late, always hovering near the cafeteria but never eating. 60 days of excuses about laundry problems and lost backpacks. Most teachers would have reported it to the counselor and moved on. But Karen couldn't shake the feeling that something was desperately wrong. So she did something that probably violated a dozen protocols. She followed David home. What she discovered in that abandoned building would break her heart, challenge everything she thought she knew about poverty, and ultimately reveal the kind of courage that exists in children we walk past every single day without really seeing. If stories about hidden struggles and unexpected heroism move you, make sure to subscribe. Karen Mitchell had been teaching 7th grade math at Lincoln Middle School in Cleveland, Ohio for 23 years. She was 51 years old, divorced with 2 grown children of her own. She had seen poverty before. This was an inner-city school where most students qualified for free lunch, where many came from single-parent households, where resources were scarce and needs were overwhelming. But David Martinez was different. Karen first noticed him on the first day of school, a Monday in early September. He walked into her 3rd period math class with a confidence that surprised her. Most 12-year-olds slouched, avoided eye contact, tried to blend into the background. David walked in with his head up, made direct eye contact, and said, "Good morning, Mrs. Mitchell," in a clear, polite voice. He was small for his age, probably 5 feet tall, with dark hair that needed cutting and brown eyes that seemed older than they should. He wore jeans that were slightly too short, exposing worn white socks and a gray hoodie over a white t-shirt. His backpack looked like it had been through several previous owners, held together with duct tape in places. But none of that mattered once Karen started teaching. David was brilliant, not just smart, but genuinely gifted in mathematics. He grasped concepts immediately, solved problems in his head that other students needed calculators for, and had an intuitive understanding of numbers that couldn't be taught. "David, can you explain how you solved problem 7?" Karen asked during that first class. David stood up and walked to the board. His explanation was clear, logical, and showed a depth of understanding that surprised even Karen. The other students watched him with a mixture of admiration and resentment. That was day 1. On day 5, Karen noticed David was wearing the same outfit, the same jeans, the same gray hoodie, the same worn sneakers. She made a mental note but didn't think much of it. Maybe he just really liked that outfit. Kids could be particular about their clothes. On day 10, the clothes were still the same. Karen looked closer. The jeans had a small stain on the left knee. The hoodie had a tiny tear in the left cuff. She could track these identifying marks now, could confirm that yes, these were definitely the same clothes. On day 15, Karen started paying closer attention. David always arrived at school at least 30 minutes before first period. He would go to the library and read or work on homework. During lunch period, he would hover near the cafeteria entrance but never go in. When other students asked him why he wasn't eating, he would say he'd brought lunch from home, but Karen never saw him eat anything. After school, David would stay late, usually in the library or helping other students with their homework. He wouldn't leave until the building closed at 5 p.m. On day 20, Karen approached him after class. "David, is everything okay at home? If you need anything, you can talk to me." David's smile was immediate and convincing. "Everything's fine, Mrs. Mitchell. Thanks for asking. I noticed you wear that hoodie a lot. It's a good one." "Yeah, it's my favorite." No hesitation, no discomfort. Perfect response from a kid who had nothing to hide. Except Karen didn't believe him. On day 30, Karen checked David's school records. Mother, deceased. Father, whereabouts unknown. Guardian, Maria Martinez, grandmother. Address, 4217 Morrison Street, apartment 3B. Karen made a note of the address but didn't act on it. Not yet. On day 40, she noticed David's shoes were developing holes. The soles were separating from the uppers. He walked carefully as if trying to keep them together through sheer will. On day 50, Karen brought it up in a staff meeting. I have a student, David Martinez, who I think might need intervention. He wears the same clothes every day, never eats lunch, seems to have no adult supervision. The school counselor, Ms. Rodriguez, pulled up his file. David Martinez. Yes, his grandmother is his legal guardian. We've had contact with her. She's elderly but managing. David's attendance is perfect. His grades are excellent. Unless we see signs of abuse or neglect that meet legal thresholds, there's not much we can do. We're understaffed and overwhelmed. If he's not causing problems, we have to focus on the kids who are. It was a reasonable response. It was also completely inadequate. On day 60, a Friday in November, Karen made a decision. School ended at 3:15 p.m. Karen watched from her classroom window as David left the building, his backpack slung over one shoulder. Walking with that same careful gait that protected his disintegrating shoes. Karen waited 5 minutes, then followed. She kept her distance, staying half a block behind. David walked with purpose, not looking around, not stopping. He walked through neighborhoods that got progressively rougher, past boarded-up houses and empty lots filled with trash. After about 20 minutes, David turned onto Morrison Street. Karen's heart sank. This was the address from his file. But this neighborhood was worse than she'd imagined. Abandoned buildings, cars on blocks, clusters of people on corners who watched her pass with suspicious eyes. David walked to number 4217, but he didn't go into apartment 3B. Instead, he walked around the building to the back where an old factory sat behind a chain-link fence. The factory had been closed for years, its windows broken, its walls covered with graffiti. David looked around quickly, then squeezed through a hole cut in the fence. Karen's breath caught. He was going into the abandoned building. She waited until David disappeared inside, then approached the fence. Through the broken windows, she could see flashlight beams moving in the darkness. Karen pulled out her phone. She should call the police. She should call Child Protective Services. She should do something official. Instead, she squeezed through the same hole in the fence. The building's interior was dark and smelled of decay and mildew. Karen's eyes adjusted slowly. She could hear voices now. Young voices, and she moved toward them carefully, avoiding broken glass and debris. She found them in what must have once been an office space on the second floor. Someone had covered the broken windows with plastic sheeting. There were sleeping bags on the floor, a camping lantern providing light, and 4 children. David was there along with 3 younger children, 2 boys and a girl ranging in age from maybe 5 to 9. They were gathered around a small camping stove where David was heating something in a pot. "Did you bring food, David?" the little girl asked. She had dark curls and wore a jacket that was too big for her. "I got some cans from the donation bin behind the church," David said. "Soup and beans. We're good for a few more days." "I'm cold," one of the younger boys said. "I know, Miguel, come here." David wrapped a blanket around the boy. "We'll stay close together tonight. It's going to be warmer this weekend." Karen stood frozen in the doorway, taking in the scene. These children were living here. Actually living here in an abandoned factory with no adults, no heat, no proper shelter. "David," Karen said quietly. All 4 children whirled around. David's face went white. For a moment, nobody moved. Then David stepped in front of his siblings, his body language protective. Please don't call the police, David said, his voice shaking but firm. Please, they'll separate us. They'll put us in different foster homes. I can't let that happen. Karen stepped fully into the room, her hands up in a gesture of peace. David, what's going on here? Where is your grandmother? David's composure crumbled. Tears filled his eyes. She died. 8 months ago, heart attack. We found her in the morning. Why didn't you tell anyone? Because they'll split us up. David's voice rose. We're not all from the same father. Social services will put us in different homes. I promised my mom before she died that I'd keep us together. I promised. The little girl started crying. One of the boys wrapped his arms around David's leg. Karen felt something crack open in her chest. David, you can't live like this. It's November. Winter is coming. You have no heat, no running water. We have water, David interrupted. I collect rainwater and boil it. I steal soap from the school bathrooms. I wash our clothes in the river when I can. We eat from donation bins and food banks. I'm keeping them safe. They go to school every day. Their attendance is perfect. I'm managing. Karen looked around the makeshift home. There were children's drawings taped to the walls, a small collection of books. School papers organized neatly. David had created order in this chaos, had built a life for these children out of nothing. How old are you, David? Karen asked, though she knew. 12. I'll be 13 in March. And you've been doing this for 8 months? Taking care of them, going to school, keeping this secret? David nodded, tears streaming down his face now. I didn't know what else to do. I can't lose them, Mrs. Mitchell. They're all I have. We're all we have. Karen sat down on the floor, her legs suddenly weak. These children. This brave, terrified, impossibly courageous child who was carrying a burden no 12-year-old should ever have to carry. Tell me everything, Karen said gently. Tell me how you've survived. David sat down, pulling his siblings close. The little girl, whose name was Sophia, climbed into his lap. The 2 boys, Miguel, who was 7, and Carlos, who was 9, sat on either side of him. After Grandma died, David began, his voice quiet, I knew we had maybe a day before someone would find out, maybe 2. The landlord would come looking for rent. A social worker might do a home visit. So I made a plan. You were 11 years old, Karen said, almost 12. I took everything we could carry. Clothes, blankets, some food. I knew about this place because Carlos and I used to explore here before Grandma got sick. There's this room, it's hidden, most people don't even know it's here. It has walls, a door that locks, windows we could cover. It's not perfect, but it's shelter. And you've been here for 8 months? David nodded. I set rules. Everyone has to go to school every day, no exceptions. School means meals, even if I can't always eat. It means they're safe for 6 hours. It means they're learning, getting an education. That's the only way out of this. What about food? Food banks, if I can get to them without people asking too many questions. Donation boxes behind churches. Sometimes I take day-old bread from the dumpster behind the bakery on 3rd Street. The owner knows, I think. He always bags it separately, puts it on top, never says anything. Karen felt tears burning in her eyes. For water, I collect rainwater in buckets. I boil it on this camping stove. It's not perfect, but we haven't gotten sick yet. For washing, there's the river in summer. In winter, I heat water on the stove and we do the best we can. I stole soap and shampoo from school bathrooms. I'm sorry about that. Don't apologize for surviving, Karen said firmly. For clothes, there's a donation bin behind the church. But I can't take too much or too often because people notice. So I wear the same things. I wash them when I can, but it's hard without running water. The kids, I make sure they have clean clothes. I make sure they look okay. Me, it doesn't matter as much. It matters, Karen said. Sophia spoke up, her small voice clear. David takes care of us. He makes sure we brush our teeth and do our homework. He reads us stories before bed. He's a good brother. David hugged her tighter. I'm trying. What about heat? Karen asked, looking around the cold room. We have sleeping bags. We zip them together and sleep close. Body heat, blankets. In really cold nights, I light the camping stove just for warmth, but I have to be careful about the fuel. It's expensive and hard to get. Where do you get money? I collect cans and bottles for recycling. It's not much. Maybe $10 or $15 a week if I'm lucky. I save it for emergencies, fuel for the stove, soap, things we absolutely need. Carlos spoke up. David found a wallet once. It had $200 in it. He found the address inside and returned it. Karen looked at David in disbelief. You returned it? David, you needed that money. David's jaw set stubbornly. It wasn't mine. The man who lost it, he had pictures of his family in there. He needed it too. My mom always said we're poor, but we're not thieves. I'm not going to start now. Karen had to look away, overwhelmed by the integrity of this child who had every reason to justify taking what he needed but didn't. What about school? She asked. How do you do your homework here? David pointed to a corner where a small solar-powered lamp sat. I found that in a dumpster. Still worked. I do homework while there's daylight or at school before and after classes. The little ones, I help them at school during lunch and after. We manage. And no one has noticed? No neighbors, no authorities, no one? This building is condemned. Nobody comes here. The fence keeps most people out. And we're quiet. We don't make noise. We stay hidden. During the day when the kids are at school, I hide anything that might make it look like someone lives here. At night, we're careful with light. We survive by being invisible. Karen stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the gathering darkness. These children had been invisible for 8 months. 8 months of David carrying a burden that would have broken most adults. 8 months of choosing survival over safety because he knew that safety meant separation. David, Karen said, turning back to face him. I need to be honest with you. What you're doing, it's extraordinary. You're brave and resourceful, and you love your siblings more than anything. But you can't keep doing this. Winter is coming. Real winter. The kind of cold that kills people. You'll get sick. They'll get sick. Something will go wrong, and when it does, it could be catastrophic. I know, David whispered. I know. But I don't know what else to do. I can't lose them. Karen made a decision. It might cost her her job. It might get her in legal trouble. But looking at these 4 children at their makeshift home built on love and determination, she knew there was only one choice. You're not going to lose them, Karen said. But we need help. Real help. Not the kind that separates families, but the kind that keeps them together. Will you trust me? David looked at her for a long moment, his old young eyes searching her face. Finally, he nodded. Karen didn't call the police that night. She didn't call Child Protective Services. Instead, she went home, made some calls to people she trusted, and came back 2 hours later with blankets, food, a portable heater, and a plan. This is temporary, she told David as she set up the heater. Just for tonight and maybe a few days while we figure things out. But I need you to trust me, David. Really trust me. Over the next 72 hours, Karen did something that was probably illegal, definitely against school policy, and absolutely necessary. She called in sick to work and spent those days researching, making calls, and assembling a team of people who could help. The first person she contacted was her lawyer friend, Marcus Webb. Marcus specialized in family law and had a reputation for taking on difficult cases pro bono. Marcus, I need your help, Karen said when they met at a coffee shop. And you need to trust me that what I'm about to tell you stays confidential until we have a plan. She told him everything. Marcus listened without interrupting, his expression growing more serious with each detail. Karen, you understand that by not reporting this immediately, you could lose your teaching license? You could face criminal charges? I understand. But if I report it through normal channels, these kids get separated. David goes to one home, the younger ones to others. They might never see each other again. That can't happen. Marcus was quiet for a moment. There might be a way. It's complicated and there are no guarantees, but there might be a way to keep them together. Tell me. You become their foster parent, temporarily at least. We file emergency custody based on the circumstances. We argue that separating them would cause psychological harm. We present David's 8 months of caretaking as evidence that these children function as a unit. We get a sympathetic judge. I'm a single teacher with a 2-bedroom apartment. I barely make enough to support myself. You'd get foster care stipends for each child. It's not much, but it helps. And there are programs for situations like this. We can make it work financially. The question is, are you willing? Karen thought about her quiet life, her small apartment, her retirement plans. She thought about David's face when he talked about keeping his family together. She thought about Sophia asking if David had brought food, Miguel saying he was cold, Carlos helping his brother protect his siblings. I'm willing. The next person Karen contacted was her principal, Robert Chang. This was the riskiest call. Chang could fire her. He could report her to the authorities, but Karen had known him for 15 years. And she knew he had become a principal because he actually cared about kids. She asked to meet him privately off school grounds. They met at his house on a Sunday afternoon. Robert, I need to tell you something, and I need you to listen to the whole story before you decide what to do. She told him about David, about the 60 days of observation, about following him, about the abandoned factory. Chang's face cycled through shock, anger, and finally something that looked like grief. Karen, you should have reported this immediately. You know the protocols. I know. And I'm prepared to face whatever consequences you think are appropriate. Fire me if you need to. Report me if you must. But before you do, let me tell you the plan. She explained Marcus's idea. Emergency foster care, keeping the family together, getting David and his siblings into a safe home while maintaining their bond. Chang was quiet for a long time. Finally, he spoke. I'm not going to fire you. I'm not going to report you. What I am going to do is help. The school has emergency funds for students in crisis. We have connections with local charities. I'll talk to the superintendent personally. If we can keep these kids together and in school, we'll make it work. Thank you, Karen said, relief flooding through her. Don't thank me yet. This is going to be complicated, but you're right. These kids have already lost everything. We can't let them lose each other too. The third call Karen made was to Father Rodriguez at St. Mary's Church, the same church where David had been taking food from the donation bin. I know, Father Rodriguez said before Karen could finish her explanation. I've known for months. Karen was stunned. You knew David was taking food? I knew a child was visiting our donation bin regularly. I made sure to keep it stocked with items that wouldn't require much preparation. Canned goods with pull tabs, crackers, peanut butter, things that could be eaten without cooking. I prayed for whoever needed it. Why didn't you report it? Because sometimes, Karen, keeping someone fed is more important than following rules. I suspected it was a child in trouble. I suspected there were others. I couldn't help in official ways, but I could make sure the donation bin was always full. It was the least I could do. Karen felt tears sliding down her face. We're trying to help them now. Officially. Can the church help? Absolutely. Whatever you need. By the end of the week, Karen had assembled an unlikely coalition. A lawyer, a principal, a priest. 2 other teachers who volunteered to help, and 3 families from her church who donated clothes, furniture, and money. Marcus filed the emergency custody paperwork. The hearing was scheduled for 2 weeks out. In the meantime, David and his siblings were legally in Karen's temporary care. Moving them from the factory to Karen's apartment happened on a Tuesday evening. David cried when he locked the door to their makeshift home for the last time. 8 months, he said. We survived here for 8 months. You did more than survive, Karen said gently. You kept your family together. You got them through something impossible. You're a hero, David. But now it's time to let people help you. Karen's 2-bedroom apartment had never felt so full. David insisted on sleeping on the couch so his siblings could share the 2nd bedroom. The first night, none of them slept much. The younger children kept waking up confused about where they were, needing reassurance that they were safe, that they were together. David wandered into Karen's room at 3 a.m., his face stricken. I'm sorry, they're scared. They'll get used to it, I promise. David, sit down. Karen patted the edge of her bed. You don't have to apologize for anything. They're adjusting. So are you. It's okay to be scared. I'm not scared, David said automatically, then his face crumpled. I'm terrified. What if the judge says we have to be separated? What if all of this was for nothing? Karen pulled the 12-year-old boy into a hug, feeling his thin shoulders shake as he finally let himself cry. Not the quiet, controlled tears he'd shed in the factory, but deep, wrenching sobs that came from 8 months of holding everything together. You're allowed to fall apart now, Karen whispered. You're allowed to be a kid. I've got you. I've got all of you. The 2 weeks before the hearing were chaotic and beautiful. The children had to adjust to having regular meals, hot water, clean clothes whenever they needed them. Simple things that most people took for granted felt miraculous to them. Sophia cried the first time she took a hot bath. It's so warm, she kept saying as if she couldn't believe it was real. Miguel asked Karen at least 20 times if they could really eat whenever they were hungry, as if expecting the food to run out or the rules to change. Carlos, the 9-year-old, was the most withdrawn. He followed David everywhere, constantly checking to make sure his older brother was okay, as if he couldn't quite trust that this situation was stable. And David struggled the most. For 8 months he had been the adult, the protector, the decision-maker. Now suddenly someone else was in charge. He didn't know how to be a child again. Karen found him in the kitchen one night at midnight, organizing the pantry. David, what are you doing? Making sure we have enough food, checking expiration dates, planning meals so we don't waste anything. David, that's my job now. I know, but... He stopped, looking lost. I don't know what my job is anymore. Karen sat down at the kitchen table and gestured for him to join her. Your job is to be 12 years old, to do homework and complain about chores and play video games and be a kid. Your job is to let me worry about food and bills and keeping everyone safe. But what if you can't do it? What if... Then I'll ask for help. From friends, from the church, from social services that actually want to help. But David, you don't have to save everyone anymore. You already did that. You kept your family alive for 8 months. You can rest now. David's eyes filled with tears. I don't know how to rest. I don't know how to stop being afraid. Then we'll learn together, Karen said gently. School became both easier and harder for the children. Easier because they had help with homework, supplies they needed, and full stomachs. Harder because other students started to notice the changes. Why are you living with Mrs. Mitchell? One boy asked David at lunch. David, with coaching from Karen and Marcus, had prepared an answer. My grandmother passed away. Mrs. Mitchell is fostering us until things get sorted out. We're lucky to have her. The truth, but not the whole truth. Not yet. Principal Chang had been quietly preparing the staff, explaining that the Martinez children were in a transitional situation and needed support, not questions. Most teachers responded with kindness, offering extra help and understanding. The story did leak eventually. A local reporter got wind of the situation. Teacher takes in 4 homeless students. The newspaper wanted to run a feature. Marcus advised against it. "Wait until after the hearing," he said. "If the judge grants custody, then we can tell the story. Until then, we keep it quiet. Media attention could complicate things." The hearing was scheduled for a Thursday morning in family court. Karen, David, and Marcus arrived early. David wore new clothes donated by the church, his hair freshly cut, looking both more like a normal 12-year-old and somehow more fragile. The courtroom was smaller than Karen had expected. Judge Patricia Morrison, a woman in her 60s with kind eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor, presided. The social worker assigned to the case, Mrs. Chen, testified first. She had visited Karen's apartment, interviewed the children, and reviewed all the documentation. "The children are clean, well-fed, and appropriately cared for," Mrs. Chen reported. "They're all attending school regularly with improved performance. The bond between them is exceptionally strong. David Martinez shows signs of having carried enormous stress, but he's adjusting well to having adult support." "What about suitable relatives?" Judge Morrison asked. "Surely there are family members who could take these children." Mrs. Chen consulted her notes. "The father of the 3 younger children is incarcerated, serving a 15-year sentence. David's father is unknown. The maternal grandmother, who was the children's guardian, is deceased. There's an aunt in Texas, but she has indicated she cannot take 4 children. She offered to take Sophia, the youngest, but not the boys. So the alternative is splitting them up into separate foster homes?" "Most likely, Your Honor. Finding a foster home willing and able to take 4 children, especially with 2 being preteens, is extremely difficult." Judge Morrison looked at Karen. "Mrs. Mitchell, you're a teacher. You're single. You've already raised your own children. Why are you willing to take on 4 more, especially in these circumstances?" Karen stood. "Your Honor, I've been a teacher for 23 years. I've seen hundreds of students come through my classroom. David Martinez is exceptional, not just in intelligence, but in character. When I discovered what he'd been doing, how he'd kept his family together under impossible circumstances, I realized that separating these children would be a tragedy." She paused, gathering her thoughts. "David spent 8 months being the adult, the protector, the parent. He sacrificed his own childhood to keep his siblings safe. The least I can do is give him a chance to be a child again, while keeping his family intact. These children have already lost their mother and grandmother. They shouldn't lose each other too. And you understand the financial burden, the emotional challenges, the fact that these children have experienced significant trauma?" "I do, Your Honor. I'm not going into this blindly. I have support from my school, my church, and my community. I have resources available, and I have the will to see this through." Judge Morrison turned to David. "David, I'd like to hear from you. Come up here, please." David approached the bench, his hands shaking slightly. He looked impossibly small standing there. "David, I've read about what you did, how you kept your siblings safe for 8 months. That took remarkable courage, but I need to know, do you want to stay with Mrs. Mitchell? Do you feel safe with her?" David's voice was clear and strong. "Yes, Your Honor. Mrs. Mitchell saved us. She didn't have to help. She could have just called the police and let them split us up. But she cared enough to find another way. She's given us a home, real beds, food, safety, and most important, she's kept us together. I trust her." "What about your siblings? How do they feel?" "They're happy, Your Honor. Sophia stopped having nightmares. Miguel is eating properly again. Carlos is starting to relax. They smile now. Real smiles, not the kind we used to do to pretend everything was okay. Mrs. Mitchell is teaching us that it's okay to need help, that asking for support isn't weakness. She's giving us a chance at a normal life. Judge Morrison was quiet for a long moment. Then she spoke. I've been a family court judge for 18 years. I've seen a lot of sad situations, a lot of children failed by the system, by adults who should have protected them. This case is different. David, what you did was extraordinary, but it should never have been necessary. You're a child. You should never have had to make those choices. She turned to Karen. Mrs. Mitchell, what you're doing is also extraordinary. Taking in 4 traumatized children is not easy. The road ahead will have challenges, but I believe you understand that. Judge Morrison looked down at the papers in front of her. I'm granting temporary custody of David, Carlos, Miguel, and Sofia Martinez to Karen Mitchell with a review in 6 months. If all continues to go well, we'll make it permanent. These children will remain together. David's legs gave out. He grabbed the bench for support, tears streaming down his face. Karen rushed forward to steady him, and he turned and buried his face in her shoulder, his whole body shaking with relief. Thank you, he whispered. Thank you. The newspaper article finally ran 18 months after the hearing, once the adoption was finalized. The headline read, Teacher adopts 4 siblings she discovered living in abandoned factory. The story went viral. National news picked it up. Karen's phone wouldn't stop ringing with interview requests. She declined most of them. This wasn't about publicity. It was about family. But she did agree to one interview, for a segment on education and poverty. The reporter came to their home, now a 3-bedroom house they'd moved into with help from donations that poured in after the initial story broke. People call you a hero, the reporter said to Karen. How does that feel? Karen smiled. I'm not the hero of this story, David is. He's the one who kept his family alive. I just gave them a place to heal. David, now 14 and several inches taller, sat beside her. He'd filled out, no longer the skinny child who'd worn the same clothes for 60 days. He was on the honor roll, captain of the math team, and volunteering at a local food bank on weekends. What would you say to other kids in similar situations? The reporter asked him. David thought carefully before answering. I'd say that asking for help isn't giving up. I thought I had to do everything alone, that accepting help meant I'd failed. But I was wrong. There are people who care, who want to help. Teachers like Mrs. Mitchell, people in your community. You don't have to carry everything by yourself. Sofia, now 9, was thriving in school. She joined the school choir and discovered she loved to sing. Miguel, 11, had made the soccer team. Carlos, 13, was learning guitar and writing songs about resilience and hope. The abandoned factory had been torn down 6 months after the children moved out. A community center was being built in its place, funded partly by donations inspired by the Martinez family's story. It would offer after-school programs, meal services, and support for families in crisis. Karen stood at the construction site one afternoon, David beside her. Hard to believe we lived there, David said quietly. Seems like a lifetime ago. In some ways it was. You're not the same person you were then. Neither are you, David pointed out. You went from a single teacher with a quiet life to a mom of 4. Karen laughed. Best decision I ever made. Hardest, but best. Do you ever regret it? All the chaos, the expense, the stress? Karen looked at him seriously. David, every morning I wake up to Sofia singing in the shower, Miguel arguing with Carlos about whose turn it is to feed the dog, and you making breakfast for everyone, even though I've told you 100 times that's my job. Do I regret it? Not for a second. David smiled, that genuine smile that had taken months to appear. I still help with breakfast because I want to, not because I have to. There's a difference. I know. And that's how I know you're healing. The changes in David were profound. He'd started therapy, working through the trauma of those 8 months and the losses that came before. He was learning to be a kid again, to trust that the adults around him would handle the adult responsibilities. But he'd kept some of the strength he'd developed. He was responsible, thoughtful, and deeply compassionate. He volunteered at organizations that helped homeless families, using his story to advocate for better support systems. "No kid should have to do what I did," he told a city council meeting when he was 14. "We need better safety nets, better communication between schools and social services, and more resources for families in crisis. We need to make it easier for kids to ask for help without being afraid they'll lose their families." His testimony helped pass funding for a new program connecting schools with social services, designed specifically to help families stay together while getting support. Karen watched him speak and felt overwhelming pride. This child, who had survived impossible circumstances, was using his experience to help others. He'd transformed his pain into purpose. The Martinez siblings' story touched thousands of people. Donations to local foster care systems increased. More people volunteered as foster parents, specifically requesting sibling groups. Schools implemented new protocols for identifying students in crisis. But perhaps the biggest impact was in the stories that people started sharing. Teachers reached out to say they'd been inspired to pay closer attention to their students. Neighbors reported checking in on families who seemed to be struggling. The ripple effects were immeasurable. 3 years after Karen first followed David home, she sat at his middle school graduation, watching him receive an award for academic excellence and community service. As he crossed the stage, she thought about that first day of school, when he'd walked into her classroom in those same worn clothes, carrying a burden no child should carry. He'd come so far. They all had. After the ceremony, David found her in the crowd. "Thank you," he said, hugging her tight, "for seeing me, for not looking away." "Thank you for trusting me," Karen replied, "for letting me be part of your family." "You're not part of our family," David said, pulling back to look at her. "You are our family. You're our mom, in every way that matters." Karen's eyes filled with tears. She'd heard him call her mom before, but it never stopped feeling miraculous. As they walked to the car where Sophia, Miguel, and Carlos were waiting, Karen thought about all the things that could have gone wrong. If she'd looked away, if she'd followed protocol instead of her conscience, if David hadn't trusted her, if the judge had ruled differently. But they hadn't gone wrong. Against all odds, everything had gone right. David Martinez's story is not unique. Across the country, there are children living in cars and shelters in abandoned buildings, desperately trying to survive while maintaining the appearance of normalcy. They show up to school with smiles that hide empty stomachs and fear. They wear the same clothes because they have no others. They carry burdens that would break most adults. And most of the time, we don't see them. We walk past them every day, these invisible children, because they've learned to hide their struggles, to pretend everything is fine, to survive by being unnoticed. Karen Mitchell's decision to not look away changed 5 lives directly, 4 children and herself. But indirectly, it changed thousands more by showing what's possible when we choose to see, to care, and to act. The system failed David and his siblings. Their grandmother died and no one noticed for 8 months. No one checked on them, visited them, or questioned why these children seemed to have no adult supervision. The cracks in the system were wide enough for 4 children to fall through completely. But one teacher noticed, one teacher paid attention, one teacher chose to see a child who was working very hard to be invisible, and that made all the difference. The lesson here is not that teachers should break protocol, or that individuals should bypass the system. The lesson is that we need to pay attention. We need to really see the children in our communities, in our schools, in our neighborhoods. We need to look past the surface and ask the harder questions. Why is this child wearing the same clothes? Why don't they ever eat lunch? Why are they always the first to arrive and the last to leave? These aren't just quirks or preferences, they're often signs of deeper struggles. David was brilliant at hiding his situation, but the signs were there. It took someone who cared enough to look closely, to notice the patterns, to trust her instincts that something was wrong. How many children are we not seeing right now? How many are hiding in plain sight, pretending everything is fine while carrying impossible burdens? The answer is heartbreaking. Too many. But Karen's story also shows us something hopeful. One person can make a difference. It doesn't always require adopting 4 children or making life-altering sacrifices. Sometimes it just requires paying attention, asking questions, and refusing to look away when something doesn't seem right. If you're a teacher, look at your students. Really look at them, notice the patterns, trust your instincts. If something seems off, investigate. Yes, follow protocols, but also be willing to go beyond the minimum required. If you're a neighbor, a coach, a youth leader, anyone who interacts with children, pay attention. That quiet kid who always seems fine might not be fine. That teenager who's always helping others might be drowning themselves. And if you're someone who's struggling, if you're carrying more than you can handle, please know this. Asking for help is not weakness. It's courage. David thought asking for help meant losing his family. The truth was that asking for help saved them all. The final truth about this story is that it shouldn't have been necessary. Children should not have to live in abandoned buildings. They should not have to choose between staying together and being safe. They should not have to carry adult burdens. But until we build better systems, until we create stronger safety nets, until we make it easier for families to get help without fear of being torn apart, stories like David's will continue to happen. The question is, will we notice? Will we care? Will we act? Karen Mitchell did. And 4 children have a future because of it.